but live in the UK. My Twitter handle is @Pieter Veenstra. It's quite useful, just my name. And my blog is basically sharepaints.com. This is where a lot of my articles will appear. And today, a lot of the content that I'm talking about will basically already exist, or some of it already exists on my blog. I will give you some links towards the relevant blog posts at the end of the presentation. Then I've been an MVP since 2017, and I work for hybrid services in the UK and do all sorts of SharePoint stuff, Power Platform stuff, and anything else that's related. That's roughly enough about me, I think. Basically, the story today, it's all about flow magic. And to get you a little bit into the atmosphere, I basically want to get that bunny out of the hat today. But the big question is, what is flow magic? There are a couple of elements, I think, which I would call flow magic. One is basically performance. If that flow that you develop, if that performs really fast, that's flow magic. If you use really great APIs and it works better, great, that's flow magic. But the most important bit is when you create a flow in Power Automate and somebody else looks at it and goes, whoa, that is really good. I'd never thought about that. And especially one of the things I see quite often with my clients, they develop a flow themselves and then it doesn't really perform that well. And you just have a quick little look, a few little tweaks, and suddenly that flow that used to take 8 hours to run now suddenly runs in 30 seconds or something like that. And that is the great wow moment. And that's basically what my presentation today will all be about. How can I make those flows run faster? But it's not, performance is not just about running faster. It's also about failure handling, for example. If any of you have read my blogs over the last many years, you will remember the first blog post that came out about the try, catch, finally pattern. I'm not going to talk about that today. Plenty of other people have already talked about it, so I'm going to leave that. And then as a third element in performance, I would say is reduce... I'm getting some background noise suddenly. If you can go on mute. Thank you. The number of actions can actually be relevant too, I think, to performance. If you might have noticed recently that when you've got flows that run a lot of actions, Microsoft will give you warnings saying, oh, this flow is running too many actions. And you have to find a way of reducing the actions if you run on non-premium licenses. And so all of that will basically make your flows work, make them work better, make them work faster sometimes. So what is the main reason for a slow flow? I found basically many times an example like you can see on the screen over here, lots of apply to each steps. Apply to each steps can be bad. The really bad thing is if you've got multiple apply to eaches, and if you've got them nested in each other, you will find that it becomes really difficult to run the flows because they take longer. But also when you run them in test mode, it becomes really hard to debug. And I'll show you a couple of examples in a minute. And the most important thing I find, they look complicated. Like I mentioned earlier, that wow moment, quite often it's if you can do things in simple steps rather than in lots of complicated steps, and it becomes the flow almost describes itself, it becomes easier to debug, easier to look at, easier to understand, and most important thing, other people can understand it. Okay, in this example, I didn't rename my actions. I really should have done probably, but I also wanted to explain that I've got apply to each actions over here. Therefore, keeping the original names might actually be quite useful. Okay, let's have a look at those nested actions. You can see over here, I've got some nested apply to each actions. And when you run them, this is exactly where you can see the problem. Imagine if this flow over here took 8 hours to run. And I've got 32 items over here. This bit over here is grayed out until they've all finished. That's pretty nasty to debug. because it means you have to finish. If you now cancel this flow, you would still not know what happened inside. You might then find yourself sending emails to yourself, for example, with the data that is from the inside that run. But what if, for example, item 16 is generating you the error? That means you're getting 15 useless emails first. And even then, you don't really get maybe the information that you're really after. It makes it difficult to debug, doesn't it? And if you then look at these kind of flows, they run 35 seconds. This runs 0 seconds, this runs 2 seconds, but you can't really see what's really happening. I'm going to have a look at a number of examples of how can I optimize flows, but keep this idea in mind that you've got the complexities of apply to eaches in flows. But before I do that, I first want to explain a little bit what these kind of flows do. And I will basically use, for most of my examples today, Microsoft Planner and Microsoft Teams. And these flows might not always make 100% sense, but they will give you the patterns that I'm trying to explain. Sometimes the better options are available. I'm aware of the better options being available, but it's just to show you the patterns. If I quickly give you an introduction to Microsoft Planner, just in case there are some people on the session who are not familiar with Microsoft Planner. Basically, the way it works is that you've got tasks. They live within a plan. So in this case, my plan is called my test plan, and that plan lives within my team called my test. And I've got lots of tasks. I can assign these tasks. I've assigned them all to myself. And you can see some tasks might even be overdue. So for example, over here is one that's overdue. And well, a task called sleep is definitely overdue because it should have happened last week. There are lots of different things. And then you've got your buckets over here, the to-do, the plans, other tasks. And you can call them whatever you like. I've even seen people, for example, having different companies over there listed as buckets. You're completely free what you want to call them. Another thing over here important is these labels kind of things. You can label your tasks. But when you look at Power Automate and Planner, it can get all the data out of Microsoft Teams, out of Microsoft Planner. But the data from Microsoft Planner is really, really difficult. Or it's not really difficult, it's just not very complete. It gives very limited information back. And we'll have a look at that in a bit. Anyway, we're back to our tricks, because I've actually created a couple of tricks that I want to go through. The wrong button over there. There we go. I've created a number of tricks, and this is going to be trick number 1. Using the first function. Remember earlier I was talking about how can we get rid of all these apply for each actions. I've got my flow over here, and I will go into a live demo in a little bit, but I first want to explain the pattern. I'm having a trigger that's just manually, I click on the start somewhere and the flow will run. Then I'm collecting all the teams that I've got access to. What I then want to do is I want to collect all the, from all the teams that I've been given, I just want to select my test team because I'm only interested in one test team. Then I'm going to apply to each. Then I'm going to list all my plans. And then I'm going to filter just my test plan, because I could have multiple test plans within a team. As you can see over here, I'm doing apply to eaches on just a single item. Is that clever? I don't think so. So I'm going to show you on my next slide. Over here, this is basically the same branch, same flow as I showed you earlier. I've got an apply to each with just one step. I'm sure we all agree this is so much easier. It's so much simpler. And I will show you how to build that. If we basically just look at this action over here, the list plans for the group, and I will build this in a minute in a flow as well. This is basically the same action. What this does is I'm using a first function, and I'm collecting the information from that filter action, and then I'm taking the ID. What this does is, if I look back at my flow over here, team is giving me a list of teams. That part of that information will be all the IDs of all the teams that I've got access to. I've filtered my test team, and now what I want to do is to list all the plans within that team. I use the ID of that team. And the way to do that is collect that ID. But the important thing is over here is that I use that first function. If I go into a live demo of this, I'll go to my Microsoft Flow and I'll take over here my trick number 1. I'll stick it into edit mode. You can see over here, it's exactly the same flow as you just saw on that screenshot. Over here, I've got my first function. I already know what the expression is going to be, but I'm going to rebuild that for you. I've got my array over here. The important thing first is to understand what my data looks like. See, I could just copy paste that expression and say, hey, this is the expression, but that doesn't help you very much. You need to understand how do you build that expression. So what I'm first going to do is I'm just going to run the flow. And it'll take a second or so. There we go. And the important thing now is to understand what this filter array is actually giving me. The output over here is giving me an array. You can see over there the square brackets. And then you've got an object in there. This bit, and it starts and ends with the curly brackets. After that, you've got your ID, and that's the thing you will be after soon. And I've got my test team. I've got my description that was my test team as well, and it's archived is set to false. Whatever that information may be, I don't really care. All I'm after is this ID, but I want to get that ID of the only item in my array, and I'm 100% sure that I only have one item. Reason why I'm sure is because I only want the one that's called my test team, and I know that my team names are all unique. So what you can now do is you select your action, whatever action you might want. So I'm going to create a list plan. There we go, and I need to get that group ID. You could over here just select a team. But I don't want to do that. I want to go for the enter a custom name, because I want everything to be flexible. I could, for example, imagine that this flow was actually called from a Power App, and the Power App passes in your team name. So I don't want to manually select it. What you now can do is first, that's the expression I want. So I want to take the first item from my array of data, from my single item array. Now a little trick in a trick almost. Over there, I can click on the dynamic data. Lots of people like selecting things from dynamic data. I like this. It just builds my expression. You could also type this, the whole thing, but this is the easier way, isn't it? And I go like this, ID, and I hit OK. And I've got my expression built over there. And if I now run the flow again, it will exactly list all my plans over here and will continue the rest of the flow. I'm basically doing the same trick over here and over here, where I'm running firsts, but now it's on a filter of my plans. That will basically explain the idea of first. And this is one way of getting rid of your apply to eaches and make your flows perform better. So I'll go back to my presentation. Here we go. Time for trick number 2. We found the first way of getting rid of the apply to eaches. The second trick I'm going to present today to you is by using a select action. Imagine I've got my list tasks action over here, and I actually want to use this date. What I want to do is I want to present that to a user, but I don't want to present this ugly, well, lots of junk kind of stuff in there. I want to nicely format the date. To nicely format the date, you can use a function called format date. And at the same time, I want to process the whole list of tasks that I'm getting back. So what you could do is create an apply to each that does all sorts of stuff or whatever, or you create one action over here. This over here, all it does is a format date and it creates fields. This action over here is called a select action. So I'll again in the demo in a minute, I will show you how to create all of this. But what it in short, what it does, it takes in the from parameter the actions that are returned by the list tasks action, and then I want to present in a new array the title and the created. I know there is more information available in the tasks, but I'm not interested in it. I don't need it. So you might as well reduce the information, and at the same time, with a single action, reshape the format datetime using the format datetime and then reshape the created property. So I now get two properties back. So if we have a look at a flow for this, and I'll get my flow demo up running over there. I made some changes, so I'm just going to ignore those. And over here, I've got my second trick. And that will load up. And you can see over here, as part of my flow demo over here, I've got my action over here. I'm going again. I think it's useful to just rebuild it. Again, I could just show you the expressions, but it doesn't really help that much, I think. So I'm going to take the select. And over here, I'm going to take the value of like I've got over here. What I could do, for example, is just copy paste it. So like this sometimes works. There we go. That would work. Or if I want to, what I could also do is I find over here the right item that I'm looking for somewhere over there. Yeah, value over there. It's always nice when it's being helpful. And over here, I could now create a property called title. And I can actually select, oh, sorry, I need to go over there. There we go. One thing to notice over here is you might know that if you reference a field within an apply to each, you will use the, a slightly different way of referencing your current items. Within the select action, you basically use an expression over there, item, and then open close brackets, question mark, and then the field name that you're after. So when you want to build this up, what you could also do is type the expressions, of course. First, run the flow, and then find out what the output is from the list tasks, and then use it and type it in within the expression editor. But dynamic content, when it's available, is the easier option. But in this case, we also want to create an expression for the created date, but we didn't want to have that ugly date. We now need to know what's that field name called. Oh, we might have to run the flow first, or we just look at the previous run. So I'll quickly open up my flows over here in a separate tab, so I can go back to where I was later on. I will in trick number 2. Okay, that's loading up. There we go. Interested in what the created field was called again. Okay, there we got it. That's easy enough. So the created date time field. That's the one we need to get. And we want to get the format date time thing over there. Okay, so if we now put the expression together, and flows and being nice and helpful, the format date time function over there. If you ever need a bit of help with this function, I've created a blog post about it a little while ago. If you Google for format date time, you'll find it somewhere in the top 3. What you could now do is, we've always wanted a timestamp. So you could type it timestamp, but actually we want to get this from the data from that list tasks. I've now got a bit of a problem because I can't get to the dynamic data. Flow is really being well, annoying by suggesting what to do, but it doesn't matter. I can just go body and now list. Then I type. There we go, and we've got a property in there. This is why earlier I quickly looked up what the field name was called, and what I'm doing is my body will basically return the output from that list tasks, and then I'm interested in just this created date field. And then the next thing that the format datetime wants is a format string. You can, on that blog post, and I'll refer to it at the end of my my presentation, you can use lots of different formats. It all uses pretty much standard formats for programming languages. But one of the favorite ones I quite often use is this single quote, D, single quote. But of course, you can also do Y for years, and MM for month, and DD for date. There are loads of different formats. It's very useful to know these kind of formats. And then when you click on OK, it does that sometimes. Oh, actually, I've done something wrong, haven't I? I should have referred to the item of there. So, item like that. There we go. That should work. And now you find that I've got my flow up and running. I'll delete this one again, and so that we can run the original flow, and you'll see that the format of the flow is quite nicely formatted. Here we go. We'll run it. As the flow is running over here, have you noticed the select was the fastest option? You can see over here, my date is now nicely formatted. That's what a single D does. So it does a month, a day, and then a year. But if you don't like that, you want to have it the other way around, then you can use different formats. Okay, so that's again a way of getting rid of an apply to each. I'm now going to go to the next option. Basically, something called the Pieter's method. And it's not something I named. We had about a year ago, I think, John Yu basically saw one of my blog posts about compose actions inside apply for eaches, and then referencing them outside the apply to each. And Brian Deng really liked it as well and compared it with lots of other scientific methods and rules or whatever. So from that moment onwards, I decided to call this method that I'm about to show you the Pieter's method. Okay, how does that work? We've seen this this flow before earlier, didn't we? This over here basically is what I call the Pieter's method. It's a very quick way of creating an array or transforming an array out of some other data. I will first give you a quick, easy sample. I've got over here a compose action. So what you put in is what you get out of it. That's as simple as the action is. Within this apply to each, I'm going through all the tasks that I'm getting. And then what I do is I create an object, a JSON object. And finally, outside the apply to each, I'm referencing this compose action. So it's outputs and then single quotes compose or something like that. I'll show you in a demo in a minute. That's the basic bit of the method that I'm describing. I'll show you a bit of a better example, one that's slightly more complicated, but it's still quite good. The data that I'm getting back from my planner has got users in it. So for example, if I assign a task to a user, I get an ugly GUID. That is the user. And it doesn't give you the name. It doesn't give you anything else. I could probably quickly show you the ugliness of the data in one of these flow runs over here. Over here somewhere there will be some users. Over there we go. This is a user. And I happen to know that this is my number. So this is me. But it's very, very useless, isn't there? So, and there is nowhere over there, but it actually has real names in it. So what I want to do is I want to create an array or a bit of data that actually has got a username in it. I know there are some alternative ways still of doing it, but I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to use the get user profile action. So that's a completely different connector that my Power Automate flow will use. So in effect, I'm merging data from two connectors into one array, which can be quite a challenge sometimes. I'm still going to use one apply to each over here, but I'm just going to use one apply to each. Plenty of times, I think you will find that these kind of actions will result in nested apply to eaches, and that's where the mess quite often starts. So I've got an apply to each over here. I'm getting the user profile from the user ID that I'm finding within my task. And then I can add a user property over here. And I'm getting the output from this get user profile action over there. And then finally, using that Pieter method, I'm going to collect this array over here, the array that's being built up by each single one of these composers. Oh, that's the next trick. I'll first go and show you this, because there is some more about it. Let's have a look. Okay, we've already got a flow run over here. And you can see over here how this works. I'm going to stick it in edit mode quickly. So over here, we've got the get user profile. All I'm doing is I'm selecting basically the property from over here, the user ID. As I mentioned earlier, there are some better ways of still doing this, because you can see over here the action already does have the name in it. But like I said at the beginning, lots of the examples, it's just to create simple examples which you could use in more complicated scenarios. So all I have to do is select the user ID, nothing complicated about that. Then in my compose over here, I'm just referring to my user profile step. I've got my format date, like I showed you earlier. And if I hover over that, the tooltip will probably pop up. And you can see over here, rather than that item, open bracket, close bracket, it actually, the way to refer to the current item in an apply to each is items apply to each, the name of the apply to each action. And then I get the property that I'm interested in. So for example, the create datetime, because that's the one I want to convert to a better format, like we saw earlier. And I've got my title, which is quite simple, because straightforward. I already had that one in my array. Then finally, this last bit, and this is the magic, I would say, is outputs and then referencing that compose. The annoying thing is, and I'll show you this over here. Oh, I made typos. Have you noticed that search, when you make typos, when you get one letter the wrong way around, Flow will still find things for you. I want to reference this compose. If I look over here in my dynamic data, it's not there. So the only escape I've got, there, is to type in the expression editor. So outputs, that's the function. I go to compose. And like that. Yep. Okay. So what I now get is I can reference that output from inside the apply to each. This is quite nice if you have, for example, an array over here. But let me take this one step further. If I go, type outputs, and now I'm going to reference that get user profile. Oh, if I could type, that would help. Live demos is always a bit of a challenge with typing. But over here, I've now referenced this user profile. I'm going to run this flow just as a demo, where you can see what it will do. Good. Yep, save and test. It's running. It's got my user profiles over here. And in my compose 3 that I just created, I've got all the details of the users that I'm looking up in my using my get user profile. This whole method of referencing something inside an apply to each, you can use any action pretty much. Any action that returns you a record, an object, and even if it returns an array, so even if you had a select inside this apply to each and you referenced it outside the apply to each, you can use that array. If you have multiple levels of, or so if you have nested apply to eaches, you can't reference any action inside the nested apply to each. This is, again, it's a good reason to stick to one level of apply to eaches. If you feel the need to create a second apply to each inside this apply to each, for example, the better way is quickly take the array out of your apply to each and then run a second apply to each. So you run 2 apply to eaches after each other. It will help your debugging experience an awful lot. So that's the trick number 3. I think we were up. Then we've got now trick number 4. It's an old discussion. Variables or compose. Which one should I use? You will already have noticed I use a lot of compose actions. But you could also use variables. And sometimes there's a good reason for it. Sometimes there's not. I've created a flow. It reads lots of items out of a SharePoint list. In this case, I've got 100 items coming out of my list. And I'm going to run them through and apply to each. I know I don't like apply to each, but for this example, it's quite good. I could now, I get every item and I do an append to an array variable. Okay, normally when you create a flow, it will probably do lots more stuff. But imagine you just have a variable and you're setting this variable. Or you've got a compose that creates the item, or maybe adjusts the item like we saw earlier. And we could then collect that item back, could collect the array back using the Pieter's method. If you run this, you will notice the timing over here. This is only 4 seconds. I would say hardly worth the bother of a presentation. But if you enable the concurrency on both of these apply to eaches, so you can run multiple branches within the same apply to each at the same time, you will find that the difference is about 16 versus 4 seconds. I will show you this in a demo in a minute. The reason why is because variables, they lock branches that run in parallel. So for example, if you had parallel branches in your flow, I don't particularly like parallel branches because they make your flow really wide, and my monitor isn't that wide. It just becomes annoying to use. The same with switch actions. They also make your flows really wide. And it doesn't particularly help quite often having to scroll left and right all the time. But if you've got those branches that run at the same time, if you've got a variable that's used over there, those branches will start to lock. Until one branch is finished with that variable, the other branch will not run. It might start, but it will get stuck on that variable use. And that's one of the reasons why things get so slow. So I think it's time to do a quick demo of this. Go to my flows again, and I'm on trick number 4. Still got a few tricks to go. Okay, I've got a variable over here that I'm initializing. That's basically my array variable. I've got my get items. I've got a list where I'm listing all of my all the connectors within the Power Platform, and I've got it on my SharePoint site over there. And I'm running an apply to each over there that does the append to the array variable. So I'm just ending up with a copy of the array of the items. I know it doesn't make too much sense again. And over here, I've got my compose, and I'm collecting the compose afterwards with to collect the array back. So this section over here does exactly the same as this section over there. I know I'm using 3 actions over here, or 3 steps, rather than the 2 steps over there, but it's worth it. And we'll see that in a minute. I'm first going to run the flow, just to double check if concurrency is on. But I'm going to switch that off first. Done. Settings off. Done. I'm going to run this, and I will actually need to do a little bit of slow talking probably, because this will take a little while. It won't take very long, but about 30-40 seconds. Of flow is being really helpful, telling me that I'm doing things that might be dangerous, but it's okay. 10 seconds. Like we said, it was probably somewhere between the 30 and the 45 seconds where it will run. That will take a little bit of time. The second apply to each will be slightly faster, like we saw earlier. 25 seconds, even quite a good performance. The second one So 11 seconds, and we'll get there in a few seconds. But you'll find probably it's fairly similar. It might just make a few seconds difference. Exactly 25 versus 18. I wouldn't be too worried about. But if we now enable the concurrency, and we do this over here too, and we now rerun the flow, it will run a lot faster. And I can speed up to normal speed again. It will process my 100 items. 50, I only set it to 20, I think. I didn't upgrade it to the 50, but you see over there it's 14 seconds, and over here I'm just down to 2 seconds. That is a lot faster. And now you'll find that you suddenly gained. Imagine if that flow that you created ran in 8 hours time. It can now run in 30 seconds. And that happens an awful lot. So use compose where you can. You can't always use compose. Sometimes you have to use arrays, but you might have to pay for that in time. Okay. Trick number 5. And trick number 5 is the REST API. Lots of actions, lots of flows will interact with SharePoint. Initially, when I started working with Power Automate, it was very much like, well, I had to replace SharePoint Designer or Nintex workflows or K2 workflows or any other workflow engine that I might possibly have within my cloud environment. Lots of these third-party suppliers, they also have cloud versions of it. So you could just stick with them. But quite often, when you migrate from an on-premises environment, and you want to go to the cloud, you think, well, okay, Power Automate is good. I might as well try and use it. That automatically almost means that all of the, or a lot of the actions that you're going to run are SharePoint related. You could, for example, update an item, get an item, or create an item, or whatever other stuff. And you can see over here on my screen, there are loads of actions around. Getting familiar with them, by the way, is quite useful because there are new actions over there all the time. But REST API is one of those actions. Like I have got the one that's selected over here, the send an HTTP request to SharePoint that basically runs REST API calls. REST API is very often used by coding developers, but it's also very useful within the Power Automate world. A lot of people are scared of it, but they shouldn't be because it's not that complicated once you get used to it. Again, I've got a couple of blog posts on it, and I'll reference them later on in my presentation towards the end. If I look at, for example, the out-of-the-box update item action, or even the create item, one of the things I don't particularly like it is that it will present all of the fields that I could possibly want to set to me. It's a very big form sometimes. That becomes quite a pain. Or when I've got required fields, yeah, it doesn't particularly like that. I've got to just fill them in again sometimes. Or when I do a get items, it really doesn't matter if I use a get items in a connector or if I use REST API. Why does it not matter within get items? Get items basically will just get you the item, and whatever that data format is, flow, while you're designing your flow, doesn't really know which fields you've got. It doesn't need to know. But when you do an update of an item, it wants to offer that form to you, ideally. We'll see that in a minute. And that form, like this one over here, you have to fill in some of these fields, whatever fields you want to set. The ones you don't want to set, just leave them blank, and they won't be updated. You could have this form for a create item or for an update item. It doesn't really matter. Those actions are fairly similar. But if you wanted to, you could use a REST API. And I'll give you a quick example over here of a REST API call. This is an HTTP request to SharePoint action. You select your site. Nothing complicated by that. You had to do that in the other actions as well. You now need to specify this bit over here. That's a little bit complicated. You now need to know what the API looks like. What are what they call the endpoints. So this underscore API underscore slash web blah 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 specifies what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do something with the site. I'm going to do something with lists. The get by title probably gets me the list called test list, and then something with items. Somebody who's familiar with REST API will know that post will actually create me the item that over here. And if I wanted to get it or get an item, I would replace the method with get. I'll show you this, by the way, in a minute in a live demo again. Then we've got over here some magic, I would say. It basically says over here that it wants to it's happily to accept JSON, and OData over here is set to verbose. A lot of examples use that verbose action, verbose step. Actually, it is not the best thing to do, the best thing to use, because this bit over here, which describes the object I'm going to create, looks a bit complicated. That underscore metadata type sp data.test list item. What is that? Well, list item is always there. sp.data is always there, but this bit over there is basically the name of my list. So I need to repeat that. If you got rid of that verbose and you changed that to no metadata, you would actually find that you can leave all that away, and your whole description of that title or the properties that you want to set becomes a lot easier. And of course, as a third thing, again, I didn't rename my action, but from a demo perspective, it's quite useful to have the original names there. How should I have developed my REST API call? And this is a lot cleaner now suddenly. I've got over here something that generates me that site URL. It could be, for example, a Power App. You've got a Power App that calls the flow, and it supplies the site URL maybe. Or in my case, I've just created the compose action and I set that to the site address, site URL. I've got a list name. So in my endpoint over here, I've replaced that get by title, the bit in between. Make sure you don't forget those single quotes over there. I've referenced my list name. And then I set over there my no metadata. It's a lot cleaner. And I hope you agree, this bit over there, that is not too complicated. I've got over here title, which is the name of the field that I want to set, and I'm setting it to a certain value called my title. Now imagine if you wanted to have dynamic data in here. So rather than my title, you want to reference a task from Planner, for example, or whatever. You could do that too. But the nice thing is you could even make the field name dynamic. How many times have you had 3-4 fields or something like that, where actually the data model is the wrong way around, and you want to dynamically set one field or another? You could do that by making this bit dynamic. You could use dynamic data, or you could use some if Boolean logic kind of thing, and you can make it as complicated as you want. If you need any help with that, you can always go to my blog, and there's a little chat on there. I can always help you with it. Then, if you look at the next action, the create item, this is basically something that I've actually figured out only last week. This has been around for quite a while, but if you fill in dynamic site address and a dynamic list name, this bit over here turns into item, and it doesn't offer you all the fields. Didn't used to be like that, but that's changed. Like I said earlier, every now and then, check those the connectors. Check if things have changed. Check if things have improved, because sometimes they do improve. And if you over here type in your same kind of JSON code, it will create that item for you in SharePoint without you having to supply all the fields, all the whatever, and it's fairly similar. So where I used REST API for some things, I actually could have not used REST API and used out-of-the-box actions. It's a choice. Performance-wise, they're pretty much both the same. And they probably both will use the REST API under the hood anyway. Okay, that's another quick little demo I think I've got over there. Let's have a look. REST API over here. I've basically, within this little demo, I've created all the 3 actions. So we can also see basically the performance. You can see over here, this is the poorly formatted with the verbose and everything. This over here is with no metadata. And over here is my create item. If I now run this flow, you can see time-wise doesn't really matter. So, like I said earlier, REST API, sometimes why bother? Because you might not need to. Other than if you want to make things nicely dynamic, it actually works. Now here you can see the items are actually returning fairly similar kinds of data. Over here, because I went for the no metadata, my data is actually nicer and cleaner as well. If you compare this with this bit over there, there's a bit of junk stuff around it, which makes it more complicated to implement and harder to use the dynamic data out of it. And over here you can find, over here I've got my create item, and my body over here is returned all the properties that I've set. So you could, again, with REST API, you've got lots of different options. It's something to consider. Trick number 6. It's basically a replacement of text where you've got objects. Before I go any further, I would like to explain over here that when you see these kind of color-coded formattings within actions in the flow runs, so the red colors and the green colors and the blue, they're objects. And they're not text. Imagine over here, if I've got that user ID, so this one over here, got a user ID, that long GUID that I want to potentially replace. And imagine if I've got 1,000 tasks and I want to replace it on all of them, I could run an apply to each. But imagine if I could do that just in one action, a compose action. Well, I can. And this is one of those other little magic tricks where it's really, really simple. I've got my list tasks over here. So over here, the code that I'm using in my compose, I'm starting in the middle of the code. So I've got my body over there. So that's the output that comes back from my list tasks. I'm converting this to a text using the string function. All it does is it takes the object, it converts it into a text. Then what I want to do is I want to do the replace. I want to replace whatever the string function is returning to me. I want to replace this GUID with my name. Okay, in practice, what you would probably do is you create another array with all of the GUIDs for all of the people listed and with all of the names of people listed. And then finally, I want to have an object back, or a JSON array back. So I'll convert that text that the replace has given me back by using the JSON function. So I think it's time to quickly show that and actually demo that in little steps. Like I just explained it from the inside out, I will do the same thing in my little demo over here. Over here. Okay, this is still from a previous time that I read it. The way I would develop this is I would start with running the flow after I've created the body of list tasks. This will just give me a copy of the list tasks, so I'm sure that will go fine. And then I go over here and I go string. And I hit OK. The way I quite often develop is a bit of trial error kind of development, where you slowly move along in the right direction. If you try to get to the end goal in one go, yes, you can do that with the experience. But quite often when you want to build, when you haven't got the experience of writing a whole expression all in one go, build it up slowly. So the first step over here is I convert it to text. So you can notice the difference. Over here it's all nicely formatted. Over here I've just got plain text. Now what I need to do is I need to do a replace. And I'll quickly cheat over here by collecting that long GUID. Of course, normally you would probably collect that out of the output from the list tasks. So we need to now enhance this function over here. I want to do a replace, don't I? Replace. Oh, so live demo, comma, and do my long GUID. And rather than my name, I will do lots of X's so we can very quickly identify the text in the output in a minute. Over here, I've got my replace. Going to run my flow again. And we can, the next time the flow runs, I will check if those X's are there rather than that GUID. So if you search for the X's, there they are. So something has been replaced. So wherever that GUID appears, it's now been replaced. If I now want to do this, convert it back to a JSON object.
Continue this line.
I'm getting some background. If someone can mute, please. Oh, it does happen every night sometimes. There we go. I now rerun my flow. You will see that now my compose action will return the modified text over here within nicely formatted text again. So that means that if I had to do lots of replaces of the same piece of text, I could just do a replace and convert the object first to text, then replace it, and then convert it back to JSON, all in one expression. One small note over here, though, is that actually there are some properties. Like I said earlier, the planner data is not particularly nice. Over here's a property called that GUID, where actually all I wanted to replace was these bits. So you might need to make your replace slightly more complicated and include this bit in your text as well. But again, it would be the same kind of idea. Okay, that is trick number 6 done. We're going to go to trick number 7, and quickly looking at the time, I think we've got about 5 minutes left. APIs. Over here, I haven't got a live demo, but it is an important trick though. When you use connectors, sometimes the connectors might not be good enough. They might just not give you what you're looking for. You could now do a number of things. You could just call other APIs, or you call the API endpoints that you need or whatever. You could even create a custom connector. You might find that some of these connectors, they're really good, but the elements that were developed over there were very much focused on what a citizen developer really needs. Maybe you need something slightly more technical. Consider things like the Graph API, for example. When you need to connect into Microsoft 365, any of those elements, you could use the Graph API. It's slightly more complicated. And I've got a blog post that fully describes, for example, how to update an Excel file in SharePoint using the Graph API. And in my case, the Excel connector just didn't do what I needed it to do. It could do some things, but it just didn't work well for me, which meant that I just used the Graph API and connected into there. One of the important tools which most developers will be aware of, but not every citizen developer is aware of, is the Graph Explorer tool. And basically what you can do is you get these kind of what they call the endpoints, like we saw earlier. But Graph, they always start with graph.microsoft.com, and you can run queries. And you can see over here, this endpoint over here gives me this output. Well, that's great. And if I want to, we have Planner, because we've done lots of Planner stuff today. If I want to do all my Planner tasks, for example, a slightly different endpoint, I run the query, and it will give me my tasks back. And I can find out what the format is of the of the JSON returned by that endpoint. Quite often you find that a lot of the connectors will actually already use the Graph API, but not all of them. And sometimes the Graph API just gives you the additional options. It's fully documented. If you look over here in the docs, there will be loads of documentation about it, lots of examples, and lots of ideas over there. Have a look at it. I don't have enough time today to go through a full example of it, but in my list of links, you will find some Graph API examples as well. If I go back to my presentation screen over there. Okay, I basically made it easy today. I created some links: trick 1, trick 2, trick 3, trick 4, trick 5, trick 6, and trick 7. And if you put https://sharepoints.com in front of it, you will get to posts that are relevant to these tricks. So feel free to go to these tricks, have a look, see what you can find out. If you need any help, just contact me. There's a little chat on there, or you can leave a comment on these tricks, and hopefully they will help you. Then I'm getting towards the end of my presentation. Don't know if there are any questions in the chat at all. So a quick look. I'll have a quick look through that. Where did you get the video links? Not sure I understand that question. I can get a bit of Donna, if you can give a bit of explanation over there. Open the shared videos, uploaded. Okay, don't know. Okay, I don't think I've got any further questions over there that I can find. So that's all very good, I think. Then I hope that you enjoyed the session. And like I said earlier, I would like to get that bunny out of the hat. So I think we need to do a little bit of magic over here. Therefore, I would like to say thank you to you all. And I think the bunny has already appeared. And if you want to contact me, feel free to contact me on sharepoints.com or on Twitter on this handle. Thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you soon again.